The smell of sickness filled their small house. It wasn't the warm, welcoming scent of food cooking, but the sharp, bitter smell of medicine and worry. Amora felt tired all over, like her bones were heavy. Her youngest son, Obi, was very sick. His tiny body was burning up, and his deep cough never seemed to stop. Amora had stayed with him all day, wiping his face with a cool cloth, whispering comfort, trying to get him to sip water. She hadn't left his side. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky with colors that didn't match the heavy feeling in her chest. Her husband, Jide, and his brothers would be home soon. As always, they would expect a hot meal waiting. Amora wanted to cook. She really did. But every time she tried to go to the kitchen, Obi would cry out, a weak, painful sound that tugged her right back. Then came the rumble of Jide's old truck. The gate creaked open, slammed shut. Amora's heart started pounding. She heard the loud greetings of the brothers, the heavy steps on the porch, the clinking of bottles. A tight knot formed in her stomach. Jide came in first. His eyes moved around the dim room before settling on Amora by Obi's bed. His face tightened. Where is the food, Amora? His voice was low, too calm. Amora knew that calm. It always came before something worse. Obi is very sick, Jide, she said quietly, her voice trembling. She pointed toward their son. I've been with him all day. I tried to cook, but... She didn't get to finish. Jide stepped forward. His hand moved fast, too fast. It hit her cheek with a loud smack that cut through the silence. Amora stumbled, her head snapping to the side. Her face burned. Pain spread quickly, sharp and hot. Emeka and Tunde, who had been laughing a moment ago, went still. Their eyes shifted from Jide to Amora. Emeka's face showed a flash of shock, then turned blank. Tunde stared at the floor, saying nothing. Amora tasted blood in her mouth. Her hand touched her cheek, but her eyes stayed locked on Jide. They didn't show anger, only deep sadness. He had hit her before, in private, during arguments. But never like this. Never in front of others. Is that your excuse? Jide shouted now, his voice rising. My brothers come to my house and there's no food? You think just because the boy is coughing, life should stop? Tears ran down Amora's face. It wasn't just the slap. It was the shame. The hurt. Obi stirred on his cot, letting out a soft cry. Amora glanced at him, then looked back at Jide, her eyes begging for understanding. But he didn't see it. His face was full of rage. The brothers said nothing. They just stood there, watching. And in that room, filled with the smell of sickness and silence, Amora's dignity broke, quietly, painfully. She stood there, caught between being a mother, a wife, and a woman no one truly saw. Amora didn't move. The sting on her cheek burned like fire, but the cold, crushing weight in her chest was worse. Jide's breath hitched with fury as he turned to his brothers. Are you just going to stand there? Or will you eat air for dinner tonight? Emeka shifted uncomfortably, eyes still avoiding Amora's. Brother, perhaps she speaks truth. The boy sounds truly unwell. His voice was soft, hesitant, a rare flicker of resistance. Jide spun on him, eyes flaring. And what does that have to do with my hunger? A man works all day, he expects food. He turned back to Amora. Get to the kitchen. Now! Behind her, Obi stirred again, letting out a weak cry. Amora's heart twisted. She wanted to rush to him, gather him up and whisper that everything would be okay, but her legs wouldn't obey. They were heavy with pain, with fear, with shame. She turned slowly and shuffled to the tiny kitchen, her bruised pride dragging behind her like a tattered cloth. The silence of the brothers wrapped around her like a suffocating veil. She lit the kerosene stove with trembling fingers, the flames sputtering in the dim room. What did she have left? A handful of yams. A few scraps of dried fish, too small to stretch into a real meal. Not enough. Not for 4 hungry men. Not for anyone. Her knife slipped twice as she tried to cut the yams, the tears blurring her vision, mixing with the steam rising from the boiling pot. In the living room, tension pressed down like a stone. Emeka and Tunde sat stiffly on the worn couch. No words. No laughter. Just the occasional cough from Obi's cot and the clink of bottles as the men drank, their silence broken only by Jide's muttering. Amora worked quickly, heart thudding. She heard Jide bark for more water, heard the sharp crack of a bottle being opened. They were drinking again. The liquor dulled their senses, but sharpened his temper. Finally, she emerged from the kitchen, balancing a small platter of barely cooked yams and a thin, watery stew. She set it down with shaking hands. Jide sneered the moment he saw it. "This is all?" he growled, shoving the plate away with a loud scrape. "This is what you offer guests in my house?" Amora didn't move. Her tears flowed freely now. "It is all we have, Jide," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I could not go to the market. Obi, he needed me." Jide stood, rising over her like a storm cloud. "Enough about Obi," he roared. The whole house shook with his fury. "My child is sick, yes, but a wife's duty is to her husband and his home. You forget your place." That was when Emeka stood. "Brother, please," he said, more firmly now. "This is not right. She is a mother. The child is ill. Let us eat what is here and leave it." Jide turned to him slowly, his face dark with rage. His eyes glowed with something dangerous, something close to madness. Amora watched it all, frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. The space between them, the men, the brothers, the wife and mother, had split open. A gulf of anger, pride, sorrow, and silence. A wound no one was willing to tend. The stew went cold on the table. Obi whimpered softly in the shadows. And the night, thick and heavy, was only just beginning. Jide's eyes locked with Emeka's, a silent threat hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, the room held its breath. Even the crickets outside seemed to stop their song. Emeka stared back, something defiant flickering in his eyes, but only for a second. He looked away, his shoulders falling. He sank back into the couch like a man who had already lost. Tunde didn't move. His eyes stayed on the floor, his silence louder than any words. The moment passed, but it left a sour weight behind. With no one standing in his way, Jide turned from the untouched food and stormed toward the corner. He twisted the old radio's knob, and loud, jarring music exploded through the room. It filled the space with noise, trying to hide the sickness and shame that clung to every wall. Amora stood still, her hands still holding the tray like a shield. The music throbbed in her skull. Her whole body was shaking now, not just from fear, but from exhaustion. From pain. From heartbreak. She turned away and slipped back into the kitchen. The untouched food sat forgotten behind her. She knelt beside Obi, gently brushing his damp hair from his forehead. Still burning. His breathing was shallow, and every cough sounded like it came from deep inside his tiny chest. She pulled the thin blanket up to his chin, wishing it could do more. Wishing she could do more. The pain on her face was nothing now. It was the fear that gripped her chest, squeezing tighter with every breath Obi took. What if he didn't get better? What if she lost him? From the living room, Jide's voice cut through the music, angry, loud, filled with blame. He spoke to his brothers, but every word was meant for her. About how she had failed him. How the house was no longer a man's home. The brothers replied in low murmurs. Grunts. Amora knew they wouldn't argue again. They never stayed in fights that didn't belong to them. This was her burden. Her cross. Her lonely war. The night dragged on. She tried to rest beside Obi, but every sound from him jolted her awake. Each time, she touched his forehead, whispered a prayer, begged silently for the fever to break. Sometime in the deep hours of night, the music finally stopped. She heard the thud of bodies falling into sleep on mats and chairs. Then, silence. Just the rattling of wind against the iron roof, and Obi's faint, labored breaths. When dawn crept in, painting the room in pale gray, Amora rose slowly. Her back ached. Her cheek throbbed dully. She looked at Obi. He was still breathing softly, but he seemed a little calmer. The cough hadn't come in a while. It gave her a tiny flicker of hope. She had to get him real medicine. Not just herbs. And food. Something warm and filling. But she had no money. The thought of asking Jide made her stomach twist. After last night? She couldn't imagine the look on his face. But she had to try. Obi needed her. He was all she had. And no matter what it cost her, she would find a way. Because that's what mothers do. As the first weak light of dawn bled into the room, Amora stirred. Her body ached from the hard floor, her cheek throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, a constant reminder of Jide's fury. But her first thought, as always, was Obi. She reached for him, her hand tentative. His skin still felt warm, but perhaps, just perhaps, a fraction cooler than the night before. A fragile tendril of hope unfurled in her chest. She needed to get him to the clinic, to the small health post in the next village. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Jide or his brothers, who were now snoring loudly in the living room. Their forms sprawled across the floor and the worn couch. The house smelled stale, of stale beer and lingering anger. Amora quickly fetched a bucket of water from the outdoor pump, washing her face, then carefully washing Obi's face and hands. She dressed him in his cleanest, softest clothes, though they were too thin for his shivering form. The biggest hurdle was Jide. She knew he wouldn't easily part with money, especially not after last night. Still, Obi needed her. She found him stirring as the sun climbed higher, casting dusty rays into the living room. Emeka and Tunde were already waking, groaning as they sat up. Jide, Amora began, her voice soft but steady. Obi needs to go to the clinic. He's very sick. Jide grunted, rubbing his eyes. His head must have been pounding. He looked at her, his expression still hard. Clinic? What clinic? You have your herbs. They are enough. No, Jide, Amora insisted, her voice gaining a quiet urgency. This is more than herbs can fix. He needs a doctor. He's not getting better. Jide finally pushed himself up, his eyes bloodshot. Do you think money grows on trees, Amora? After you fail to even make dinner, you expect me to throw money away on some fancy doctor for a child's cough. It's not just a cough. Amora's voice cracked. He is burning up. Please, Jide. Our son. Emeka, who had been listening, cleared his throat. Brother, perhaps Amora is right. The boy has been unwell for days. A clinic visit might bring peace of mind. Jide shot him a venomous look, but the words seemed to sink in a little. Perhaps the shame of his outburst last night, witnessed by his brothers, still pricked at him. Or perhaps, a tiny flicker of concern for his son pushed through his hardened facade. With a sigh of disgust, he reached into his trousers pocket and pulled out a few crumpled naira notes, throwing them onto the worn rug. Here, go. Waste my money. But don't come back telling me you need more. Amora scooped up the notes, her fingers brushing the threadbare fabric. It was barely enough for the transport fare and the consultation, let alone actual medicine. But it was something. Thank you, Jide, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She carefully lifted Obi, cradling him in her arms. He was surprisingly light, his small body limp against hers. She covered him with her wrapper, trying to shield him from the morning chill. She started the long walk to the main road, the clinic a distant hope. The dusty path was already busy with people going about their morning chores, but Amora saw none of them. Her world had shrunk to the fragile warmth of Obi in her arms, and the burning need to save him. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them. Obi whimpered softly, his breathing becoming shallower, more ragged. Amora walked faster, her heart pounding, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Each breath he took sounded like a struggle. Finally, she reached the small, weathered building that served as the local health post. A few other mothers were already waiting, their faces etched with similar worries. Amora quickly found a space on the wooden bench, bouncing Obi gently, whispering encouraging words. When their turn finally came, the nurse, a kind-faced woman named Mama Joy, examined Obi with a practiced, gentle hand. She listened to his chest, felt his glands, and checked his temperature. Her face grew solemn.